It all started on a humid Georgia evening in a corner pharmacy that rarely saw excitement after 9 p.m. The strip mall it anchored was half asleep, neon signs flickering tiredly while the heat of the day clung to the pavement like a stubborn shadow. Inside, the lights buzzed, and a teenage clerk manned the register, more interested in his phone than his surroundings. Angela Brooks, a 58-year-old nurse, stepped through the sliding doors with the kind of exhausted grace that only came from decades of double shifts and sleepless nights. Her scrubs were faded, her shoes well-worn, and her face carried lines not just from time, but from caring for strangers, for neighbors, for a community that often took people like her for granted. She didn't want much that night, just her blood pressure medication. She handed over her ID and insurance card with a practiced, polite smile, the kind you gave when you knew people rarely looked you in the eye past the name tag. The clerk barely glanced at the documents before typing into the computer with two lazy fingers. Angela waited. Minutes passed. The clerk frowned. He whispered to the manager, and something shifted. The air thickened not from the heat outside, but from the sudden tension that settled into the room like dust. The manager, a pinch-faced woman named Deidre Waller, tapped at the keyboard, glanced at Angela, then again, longer this time. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Angela felt it, that subtle coil in the gut, that familiar, ancient whisper, they think you're trying something. Deidre finally approached the counter with a sugar-coated tone that didn't match her sharp eyes. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there seems to be an issue with your prescription." Angela blinked. "Issue? I've picked this up here every month for years. The account details, they're not matching our system. I'm afraid we can't release the medication at this time." Angela took a breath. "You have my ID, my insurance. It all matches. Please, check again." But Deidre was already stepping back, stiffer now. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay here while we look into this. Authorities have been notified." Authorities. The word echoed. Angela's back straightened. "Excuse me?" No response. The clerk avoided her gaze. Deidre folded her arms, her stance screaming judgment. Angela didn't yell. Years in trauma bays and emergency rooms had taught her how to hold her composure, even when the ground cracked beneath her. But inside, the heat was rising. Not just from anger, but from history. This wasn't new. It was inherited. The sirens came quickly. Two white officers entered. One, Officer Rick Dalton, tall and square-jawed with a buzz cut that screamed authority. The other, Officer Jeremy Hanks, younger, leaner, and visibly uncertain. Deidre pointed like she was picking out spoiled produce. "That's her. Tried to commit prescription fraud, using someone else's insurance." Dalton didn't even check the screen. He stepped toward Angela like she was prey. "Ma'am, step outside." Angela stood firm. "I haven't done anything wrong." Hanks shifted, visibly uncomfortable but silent. Dalton's fingers twitched near his belt. Easy way or hard way? Around them, customers paused. A woman hurried her child away. A man by the cold meds aisle started recording. Angela noticed. "Good." She raised her voice, just enough to be clear but calm. "I have my ID, my prescription, my insurance card. Everything is valid." Dalton didn't care. He grabbed her wrist. The handcuffs clicked with a finality that made stomachs turn. Gasps filled the room. Phones recorded. Deidre smiled. Angela was marched out like a criminal. And as they shoved her into the squad car, she met Dalton's eyes and said, cool as ice, "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." The ride to the precinct was silent, except for Dalton chuckling. Another one thinking the system won't catch her. Angela said nothing. She stared out the window, letting the pain of the cuffs fuel her clarity. At the station, they booked her like an old routine. Mugshot. Fingerprints. Cell. Dalton leaned on the bars, smirking. "You want to come clean? Might help your case." Angela looked him square in the eye. "You're going to regret tonight." He snorted. "Sure, Grandma. You got a high-powered lawyer hiding your purse." Angela didn't answer. She didn't need to, because she wasn't alone. Her father was already on the move. Walter Brooks wasn't just any retiree. He was a legend, former deputy director of internal affairs at the FBI, known for dismantling systemic corruption across state lines. And when Angela's call came through, he didn't hesitate. He made one call to Washington, and then another. Back at the station, the phones began to ring. First one, then two, then every line lit up. The front desk officer started sweating. Dalton barked something about people making a big deal out of nothing. But then the door opened, and the air changed. Walter Brooks walked in like thunder given form. Tall, broad, with silver hair cropped tight and eyes like burnished steel, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Who's in charge here?" he asked. The desk sergeant stammered. "2M. Good. Then explain why my daughter Angela Brooks, licensed nurse, with no record, is sitting in a holding cell tonight." No answer. "Explain why she was arrested without probable cause. Explain why she was manhandled in public. Explain why you failed to verify her identity before calling in officers with a history of misconduct." Whispers. Movement. "Then, unlock the cell," Walter said. Dalton stepped forward, bristling. "You can't just walk in here." "I already have," Walter said. The door creaked open. Angela stepped out, shoulders squared, eyes blazing. She didn't even glance at Dalton. She walked past him, dignity intact, leaving behind a silence so thick it nearly cracked the walls. But that wasn't the end. That was the beginning. Because federal agents had arrived. They fanned out through the station, collecting footage, seizing logs, pulling files that hadn't been touched in years. Body cams were reviewed. Reports were compared. Complaints that had been buried were suddenly resurrected. Dalton and Hanks were suspended that night. By morning, DOJ investigators had taken over the precinct. Angela's story exploded. The video from the pharmacy hit the internet and went viral before sunrise. By noon, it was on every major network. Commentators debated. Politicians issued statements. But more importantly, survivors came forward. Men, women, young people, elderly neighbors, all with stories, all with pain. Angela stood at the heart of it, not as a victim, but as a catalyst. She led the charge for a federal civil rights investigation into the Savannah PD. The DOJ uncovered years of systemic abuse, racial profiling, illegal searches, fabricated reports. Files once considered lost reappeared. Whistleblowers stepped out of the shadows. Dalton's history surfaced: excessive force complaints, a pattern of targeting black residents, multiple IA investigations that had been closed inconclusively. Hanks wasn't clean either. His text messages showed complicity. Jokes, mockery, a culture. Angela testified before Congress. Walter returned to D.C. to consult with the DOJ on nationwide reform. And Savannah changed. Not easily, not quietly, but the people made sure it didn't fade. A community oversight board was established. Officers were retrained. New leadership installed. And Angela's lawsuit, joined by over 200 plaintiffs, forced a $24 million settlement and a court-appointed federal monitor. The night she first stepped into that pharmacy had been meant to be forgettable, but it became a reckoning. And when Angela stood in front of a sea of cameras at the press conference announcing the reforms, she didn't smile. She said one sentence: "I wasn't alone that night, and none of us are now." And that was the truth. Because injustice can only thrive in silence. And Angela Brooks had shattered that silence into 1,000 irreparable pieces.